in collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, have you got what it takes to enter Famelab?
Famelab criteria for evaluation, we call them the 3 C's, and that's content, clarity and charisma.
We meet the author of a book about Cyprus entitled Notes from the Graveyard of Diplomats.
Foreign diplomats who they come in with hope that the time is right and everything is possible, and they leave disappointed.
And the UN Secretary-General's Special Representative in Cyprus looks ahead to 2020.
I want to use this occasion to encourage all of us here tonight, and all Cypriots, especially young people, to reflect on how they envisage the future of Cyprus, and each person's own role in shaping it.
We're getting in early with our first topic on this week's programme because Famelab 2020 will be taking place next year. The British Council has been organising it for about the last decade, and we're joined on the programme today by Monica Dantelli from the British Council and also by Mirtani Pieri, who is from Psycho Cyprus, one of the partners of Famelab. Monica, first of all, outline for us, if you will, what Famelab actually is.
Yes, we have been doing it for 10 years, as you mentioned, and this year is a very important year for the British Council because we are working in Cyprus since 1940, which is our 80th anniversary, and in 2020 we are marking this anniversary with a number of activities on cultural relations and exchange between UK and Cyprus, and in this context Famelab is also going to be organised in collaboration with Psycho Cyprus and Research and Innovation Foundation for the 10th consecutive year. So it's very important that this year Famelab will be part of this number of activities celebrating our 80th anniversary.
Right, and if we come to Mirtani, what is Psycho Cyprus?
Okay, so Psycho is an NGO. And interestingly, it was formed, the idea of Psycho is to communicate science in a simple way. So our hope is to take science outside the universities and the classes and actually bring it to the people. So the idea is to talk about science in entertaining ways. And funnily enough, people in Psycho are ex-Famelabers. So we're all scientists that got interested in the Famelab competition, and that competition gave us some tips as to how to communicate science. So then we gathered together and we formed this NGO, and we've been doing various things like Café Scientifique, scientific festivals. We take part in various festivals with hands-on experiments. So that's the idea, and that's why, obviously, since we were born from Famelab, we really should support this competition.
Okay, if we look at science and STEM subjects in Cyprus, they aren't terribly high up the agenda, are they?
I think there is improvement, but no. And another thing we tend to see is that there's a gender issue, so not a lot of girls go into sciences. They're not very interested in STEM. So that's another thing we also like to make sure.
Is it that they're not interested, or it's a sort of cultural thing that they think they won't be any good at it? That's changing in a lot of northern European countries. I mean, look at the number of female engineers, for example, in university courses these days. They outnumber men.
It's true. But again, what we tend to observe is that they outnumber men in the lower positions, but then there's this thing called a glass ceiling, so you won't be seeing women being head of departments and things like that. So that's something we also need to change, but we think we need to change that from an early age. So
we need to do it surely in schools to start with. So what sort of things do you do with schools to try and get young people interested before they start choosing their exam path, which is going to actually be their path in life?
So Psycho, the NGO, doesn't do a lot, let's be honest. There are a lot of things we want to do, but in schools, it's the Ministry of Education that has to do something.
Yeah, but can't you talk to him?
What we do, yes, so what we do in the past is, for example, we have collaborated in doing some science competitions, because putting the element of the competitive element is always a good thing. The same thing with Famelab that we will talk about. So we have organized a competition called School Lab, where we try to bring students into the sciences, and we always try to make sure that it's gender balanced. What else? In festivals, we have we organize a big festival called the Mediterranean Science Festival. It took place two years now, 2015, 2017. Hopefully we'll have it again. And there, again, we invite schools to come and do experiments, play around. And obviously it's not just for children, but for grown-up children as well, anyone that's curious. We also have layman talks. So we bring scientists, train them, in inverted commas, to speak science in a simple way, because you can have a fantastic scientist.
And it's mumbo jumbo.
And then no one's going to love science ever again after the talk. So we have had...
So it's communication as much as anything.
Communication.
And that brings us to Famelab. So who wants to tell me about the basics of Famelab?
Okay, Famelab is a science communication competition, which, as Mirtani mentioned, it's simple. You have to communicate a science subject in a very simple way, so that people who do not have a science background can still understand. So contestants have 3 minutes to speak about a scientific subject, and they are marked.
Yes, so there's the famous Famelab criteria for evaluation. We call them the 3 C's, and that's content, clarity, and charisma. So content is all about, you talk science, and science has to be accurate. Yeah. So we have a lot of pseudoscientists and charlatans out there talking science, but the issue here is that the content has to be evidence-based and accurate. So that's content. Clarity is, did people actually understood what you said? So the judges are every year either academics or journalists or actors, so people that they don't have to have a background in the science subject that you spoke about, so they have to understand it. And charisma, the final one, is probably the most difficult to explain. It's how do you stand on stage, and do you got goosebumps? Did you make us laugh? Did you make us,
All right, it's audience engagement.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So if you think you can put those 3 things together and talk about a topic, and you're allowed props. I seem to remember talking about this 8 or 9 years ago, and a lot of the people used little props.
Yes.
So tell us about that too.
Now, I think the golden rule is anything you can carry on stage by yourself. So not something where you need help to. And it could be, people have used fantastic things. So my favorite one would be a microbiologist that talked about E. coli infection. Okay, and he came on stage eating a doner kebab, and then he started explaining what happens when you have E. coli. So I thought that was fantastic. But people bring all sorts of things, glitter to talk about the Big Bang and how stars formed, or balloons.
So you've got to be innovative as well about how you present something. Mm-hmm. Now, all these details, I presume, are online for people to find out about. So where do they go, and what do they do exactly?
Okay, so first of all, if you're interested in Famelab, like our Facebook page, Famelab Cyprus, on Facebook. And I think most people have Facebook. And there you can find all the links. So there will be a link in the British Council's page where you can fill an online registration, which is very, very simple. We're just going to ask you things like, who are you? What do you plan to talk about? Obviously, that can change, so it's fine. Why are you interested in science communication? Things like that. It's a very simple
And
online
then what
form.
happens?
And then you wait, and we get back to you when everything, so at around the 10th of March will be the final date of application. So after the 10th of March, we contact everyone else. During that time, we check if you're eligible for it, and the eligibility criteria would be that you have to be over 18 years old. Unfortunately, we can only accept people over 18. If you're below 18, there are other student competitions similar to Famelab. We can talk about this later. So over 18, there's no upper limit. We've had contestants that were 40 years old, 45, it doesn't matter. And you have to have studied in the sciences, medicine or engineering, anything that follows, let's say, the scientific method, or work somewhere in the sciences, and then you're eligible for it. Also, you have to have lived in Cyprus for 6 months, and you should be able to freely cross in the island. So unfortunately, we cannot accept applications from people that live the north of Cyprus and they need a visa to cross. So we don't. But everyone else is more than welcome to apply.
Okay, so look out for the Famelab Cyprus either on Facebook or the British Council. They've got a website, it's britishcouncil.com.cy, and if you /Famelab, you'll find it there as well. Or I guess you could pick up the phone and call the British Council if you want to find out more. You do have a couple of months to think about it, because the deadline for registration is the 10th of March next year.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Well, if you follow politics in Cyprus, you'll know that the Cyprus problem, as it has become known, has been ongoing for a considerable amount of time. And diplomats come and go, and they do their bit to try and bring the two sides together. Among them, Ingemar Lindahl, who is now retired, but he was appointed first of all as Sweden's special advisor for Cyprus in 2001, and then in 2004 he became Sweden's first resident ambassador in Nicosia, and he served here until 2012. He joins me now because he's written a fascinating book from his diaries. It's called Notes from the Graveyard of Diplomats, Cyprus 2002 to 2004. So, Ingemar, you were here much longer, obviously, than that, but this is specifically, I think, about the run-up to the Annan Plan, the time you were here as that special advisor. And I think you've always kept a diary, but when you started putting this book together, how did you decide what to include? Because I'm sure it's not your entire diary for the time.
It's true. I have excluded the more sort of private things, and my wife complained that she wasn't mentioned enough, but it has its explanation in that sense. So I concentrated on what I had written down from the daily developments of the Cyprus issue during this time when there might have been a solution leading up to the referendum in 2004, when supposedly from the perspective of the UN and the EU, a reunited Cyprus would enter the EU.
Now, as a diplomat, I know that the diplomatic corps here is involved in many different aspects of the Cyprus problem. When you were here as that special advisor, what was Sweden's prime interest? Because I know that now a lot of them work with, for example, the religious track, bringing the religious leaders together. And then you have the Slovakian ambassador for years has been having meetings of political party leaders from both sides and so on. What was the Swedish interest?
Well, the reason why we had a special advisor like half a dozen of other countries was that we used to have a battalion here, a UN battalion. We participated in UNFICIP.
They were one of the first, I think.
We were among the first, with the Finnish, the Irish, the British, and I think the Danes also, and the Austrians were among the first countries. And we contributed for 20 years. But then the Minister of Defense, he thought that UNFICIP had rather became the part of a problem than a solution. So he thought that the fact that there were UN forces almost permanently stationed didn't encourage a solution in Cyprus. So what happened was that instead we started to withdraw the battalion, and because it was needed in Lebanon at the time. But we kept the police force for a time.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that idea that the presence of the UN here is actually not helping to contribute to a solution has come to the fore again in the last year or so.
Well, I think it's easily forgotten in the basic UN resolutions about UNFICYP that it's there waiting for political talks to result in a proposal for a solution. But it's not so stressed any longer. It's more that taken for granted that there is some UN troops, though they have been considerably reduced since 1964. I think there were about 8,000 troops at the time, and now it's 600-800, so it's maybe a tenth what it was, but still it's
they're there.
They are there.
And if we look back to when you arrived in Cyprus, it was a time, I think we could say, if my memory serves me correctly, of hope, because was it not around this time that Ralph Denktash and Glafkos Cleridis actually crossed over the Green Line, met socially, had dinner and so on, and then there was this sort of blossoming of hope that finally maybe they would solve the problem. And then, of course, you talk us through it, because by the time it came to the Annan Plan referendum, everything fell apart.
Yes, your memory is quite correct. There was a hope around 2002 when the parties, and it was Denktash for a long time who held up direct negotiations, but finally under the pressure from Turkey he relented and he was forced more unwillingly than people probably thought at the time to enter direct negotiations with Cleridis. And that encouraged the hope also. They were old friends in a way. Cleridis had given some help to the Denktash family when they were threatened some years into the conflict. So they know each other pretty well. And there was a time in the past, before the Turkish invasion, that Denktash was quite interested in a solution. The hope was that these two old war horses should be able to make up and bring their peoples with them at the time in a referendum. But with the chronology of Cyprus, which is always unfortunate, there was a change on the Greek Cypriot side in 2003. So Cleridis was voted out as president. And after that, it became more and more complicated to find support on the Greek Cypriot side for the Annan Plan.
Now, this is one of the ongoing problems, it seems to me, of any attempt to solve the Cyprus problem, and that is that every 6 months, 8 months, year or so on, there are elections, either one side or the other. And they don't hold the elections for municipalities at the same time that they do for Europe or for the president or whatever it happens to be, or the parliament. So you have a break when electioneering takes over from the national issue, almost with monotonous regularity, as anybody seems to possibly be getting somewhere. How do you get over that?
Yeah, that's very difficult. Moreover, there are the elections in Athens and Ankara too. So to find a solution of the Cyprus problem, the mother countries, that they are called, they are also the guarantors, along with Britain, for the Cypriot constitution. But it's very important that the capitals of the mother countries support a solution that
and again, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't.
Exactly.
So it's a question of an alignment of leaders everywhere.
But if you go back to these years, rather critical years, there were about 3 chances for the Annan Plan to be adopted, which in 2 cases was stopped by Denktash and In the third case, just before the referendum, President Papadopoulos encouraged the Greek Cypriots to vote no. So there were actually 3 good chances, but none of them came about.
But you were here at that time, as was I, and the atmosphere on the island was nothing less than toxic in the run-up to the referendum.
It became.
It was really quite an extraordinary time.
Yes,
Why do you call the book The Graveyard of Diplomats? Do you feel that you failed?
Well,
Or do you feel that almost all diplomats who come here are likely to fail? Let's look at Álvaro de Soto. He was the
Yes.
guy in charge when you were here, wasn't he?
yes. Well, actually, I have stolen this phrase from a previous UN negotiator who called it. But I agree with this, that foreign diplomats who they come in with hope that the time is right and everything is possible, and they leave disappointed.
Tail between their legs very often.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they don't get a very nice reception either, do they, if their attempts for reconciliation or to promote reconciliation go against the current thinking. And the current thinking does seem to change in both sides according to who the leaders are or what the political parties are doing.
That is very true, and these UN negotiators, they easily get tainted on one side or the other. One who spoke Greek, Michael Möller from Denmark, he was accused from the Turkish side to be pro-Greek Cypriots, and several have been accused of sympathizing with the Turkish side. So it's very difficult to keep aloof from that.
How would you, if you like, sell your book to somebody who isn't terribly familiar with the Cyprus problem? What insight do you think it will bring them?
Well, I have tried in the book to explain. Actually, I have elaborated my notes with an explanation if I think a reader who is not day-to-day familiar with the Cyprus issue. I have included some history and some political background, so I hope that it can be read from a somewhat greater audience, though of course the Cyprus issue is not one of the greatest problems of the world today, but there are still people interested.
There are indeed. Notes from the Graveyard of Diplomats is the title of Ingemar Lindahl's book, and it's available at all good bookshops. Fascinating look into the history, particularly between 2002 and 2004, of the Cyprus problem. Earlier this week, the head of UNFICYP, who is also the UN Secretary-General's Special Representative in Cyprus, Elizabeth Spehar, hosted a reception at the Lydra Palace in the buffer zone in Nicosia, and she addressed her guests, looking back over 2019 and ahead to 2020.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good evening once again. And on behalf of the Secretary-General's Good Office's mission and the broader UN family in Cyprus, it's a pleasure for me to welcome so many dear friends, colleagues and peers to celebrate the close of 2019 and what will soon be the start of a new year. Ladies and gentlemen, today is also International Human Rights Day, with the special designated theme for 2019 being Youth Standing Up for Human Rights. If you know me well, as many of you do, you know that the theme of youth as indispensable global citizens and change makers is close to my heart, and that young people are a constituency that we strive to support throughout the UN's work on the island. When George Bernard Shaw famously said, "Youth is wasted on the young," he couldn't possibly have envisaged the courage and determination that today's youth, who account for 1 in 6 of every person on the planet, are bringing to the fore. not least to combat the global climate emergency. Young people today are better educated, healthier, and have greater access to knowledge and information than anyone else. With all of this in mind, it's no wonder that the Secretary-General and the Security Council have consistently called for an increase in the involvement of youth, as well as women, in all peace processes, including the Cyprus peace process that concerns us here. So to echo Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' words on this year's International Human Rights Day, I call on everyone to support and protect young people who are standing up for human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the fourth time that I look back on 1 year and towards the next year here in Cyprus. I can therefore honestly say that 2019 was one of the significant ones, in positive ways, but also in terms of challenges. Electrical grids are now permanently interconnected between north and south, and the interoperability of mobile phones was finally achieved, connecting Cypriots more seamlessly than before. Work on the clearance from suspected hazardous areas of landmines and unexploded ordnance has also advanced. Precious artworks and recordings have been exchanged between the sides, and important restoration of cultural heritage monuments have been completed. I recall that not only do such steps have a practical, positive impact on the daily lives of Cypriots, but they're emblematic of what is doable with the requisite display of political will. For that, I express my appreciation for the leadership and the collaboration between Mr. Anastasiadis and Mr. Akanji, which made these achievements possible. 2019 has also seen, for the first time in many years, encouraging signs of revitalization of some of the technical committees, a number of which benefited from the financing and support facility established this year and funded by the European Commission. A stock-taking exercise recently concluded by the Good Office's mission has produced recommendations that will be shared with the sides on ways to further strengthen the technical committees, making them fit for purpose, which is an expression that we usually apply to peacekeeping missions. In 2019, senior official of the Secretary-General, Ms. Jane Hall-Lute, continued her discussions with the parties to the conference on Cyprus as part of the efforts to facilitate agreement on terms of reference. The leaders also met twice under my auspices on island. Significantly, less than 3 weeks ago, on the 25th of November, the two leaders met jointly with the Secretary-General for the first time in 27 months. This meeting underscored the continued commitment of the United Nations at the highest level to support the two sides in their efforts to reach a negotiated solution to the Cyprus problem. The meeting was also a significant opportunity for the leaders to discuss the way forward between themselves and with the Secretary-General in a frank and focused manner. At the conclusion of the meeting, it was mutually and publicly acknowledged that this time must be different. Regarding this year's challenges, the inability to get back to the negotiating table after 2.5 years and tensions that continued to rise between the parties both on island and in the region were reminders that we still have a way to go. Looking ahead to 2020, including the launch of what Secretary-General Guterres is calling a global conversation to mark the UN's 75th anniversary, I want to use this occasion to encourage all of us here tonight and all Cypriots, especially young people, to reflect on how they envisage the future of Cyprus and each person's own role in shaping it. Specifically, let us ask ourselves, how will this time be different? And what can I do to make this time different? Encouragingly, recent public opinion surveys have highlighted that people in both communities place great importance on the process and maintain a common hope for change, with more positive expectations from a solution scenario than from the continuation of the status quo. Additionally, the majority of those polled in both communities believes that cooperation between the sides, even now, is instrumental, and that a solution would bring economic and social prosperity to all Cypriots. 2019 was also significant in the following way. It has shown us that while the status quo indeed remains, that status quo is not static. Important changes are occurring in and around the island that could make a solution increasingly difficult to achieve as time goes on. The same polling I mentioned a moment ago also showed that skepticism about the prospects for the peace process continues. And there's also a significant number of people in both communities who remain ambivalent regarding a solution. The irony is that youth, the same people who have proved around the world that they can lead us to a better future, are the least positive in Cyprus about a settlement. This data strongly suggests that if this time really is to be different, it will be critical for the sides to better engage, reassure, and inform their publics on the contours of a settlement and the benefits that a settlement will bring. Reaching out to youth in particular will be key. It is also why I so warmly welcome the efforts of those civil society actors in both communities who, with a shared vision, relentlessly continue to work towards a common future. In fact, as we were starting to gather here this evening, there was an NGO networking event just next door here in one of the other, as we call them, bi-communal rooms of the Ledra Palace Hotel. Together, well-established groups such as Bi-Communal Peace Initiative United Cyprus, as well as an increasing number of pro-solution actors such as Decision for Peace, to name only a few, have expressed their support to a solution based on a bizonal, bi-communal federation with political equality, and have called on the leaders to urgently resume negotiations. Unassuming, yet essential, are also the individuals such as those who gather every Saturday at the Buyukan Coffee Club. Deemed traitors by some, these Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Maronites, Armenians, and others, friends all, have met each Saturday since the first crossing opened between the North and the South in 2003, not to talk politics, but to enjoy each other's company and to illustrate the simple but powerful promise of a united island. Ladies and gentlemen, Barack Obama once said, "The terms of peace may be negotiated by political leaders, but the fate of peace is up to each one of us." This notion guides the entire United Nations family in its support of your efforts. Whether through the work of the good offices, UNFACYP, the Committee on Missing Persons, the activities of the UNDP, the IOM, UNHCR, the United Nations is working towards the same goal, to help deliver a better future on this island. We're honoured to be working alongside all of you. We're grateful for the support of our Cypriot hosts and are truly thankful for the cooperation of all communities in Cyprus and the international community alike. Building on our close partnerships and on our joint efforts over the course of the past year, and speaking on behalf of the Secretary-General's good offices and all of its staff, as well as the broader UN family here in Cyprus, we thank you and very much look forward to continuing our positive, constructive, and mutually respectful interactions in the year ahead. Mutually respectful, actually. As we bid farewell to the year 2019 and prepare to usher in 2020, I, together with the entire United Nations team, would like to wish each and every one of you a peaceful holiday period and a prosperous new year. Kales yortes, mutlu yıllar. Thank you.
Elizabeth Spehar, the head of UNFACYP in Cyprus. Well, that's about it for this week. And of course, Christmas is just around the corner, followed by the New Year celebrations. So I'll be away for a couple of weeks, but just let me say I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll meet again in a couple of weeks. Till then, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.